This Coast Division eClinic by Bruce Feld of the Concord Naval Weapons Station Railroad and Trackage was recorded on May 7, 2022.
I moved to the Bay Area from Wisconsin in '81 to go to work for Southern Pacific in management. And I moved to the Concord area and I noticed tracks swirling around the hills. And I said, what is that? Here I am on the brink of suburbia, and I see this railroad with all these tracks swirling about. So anyhow, I became very interested in the Concord Naval Weapons Station Railroad. And by way of introduction, let me just read a paragraph or two from an article I wrote for Trains and Railroads of the Past magazine. And then we'll get into the slideshow itself. Excuse me. Okay, here we go. Tucked away in the hills below Mount Diablo State Park, about 40 miles east of San Francisco, California. Let me change glasses here. Was a railroad operation that not only holds historical significance in this country's experience, but one that offered uncommon rolling stock, distinctive operations, bucolic scenery, unique structures, provocative track configurations, and plenty of local history. Excuse me. This was the Naval Weapons Station Concord Railroad inland operation. The phone rang and a deep voice answered, "Hello," I said. "Is this Will Comer?" He responded, "Yes, what's left of me," he responded in a tongue-in-cheek manner. Just then I knew this was going to be a good conversation, not from just the humor I detected in this nonagenarian, but recognizing I had made contact with someone who intimately knew a railroad that had been cloaked in mystery, at times touched with controversy, and most importantly, played a key role in the nation's defense system, as history can attest. Okay, with that, let's go to the presentation. So we hope to touch in this presentation on some history, signs and security, facilities, topography, locomotives, rolling stock, in the future. We're in the green hills of beautiful Northern California, where waves of green furrows flank the tracks. You can see a track in the foreground there. In fact, two layers. Just some bullet points on the significant events. '27 Navy considers establishment ammunition facility in the Bay Area, in Pearl Harbor in '42. They purchased 577 acres, Port Chicago. Pier 1 becomes operational in November '42. First shipment of ammo set sail for Port Chicago in '42. Pier 2 construction in '44, 6,000 acres acquired for the inland area in '44 May. Port Chicago explosion. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Many were killed, mostly African Americans. Inland area completed in June of '45. Construction begins for additional sidings, 550 ammo cars, ammunition cars. That was in July '45. Facility assumes responsibility of shipping ordnance for U.S. Army in the Pacific in May of '47. Excuse me. And other wars follow, in which the Concord Naval Weapons Station played a role, Korea and Vietnam. And the inland area is closed in November of '05. I'm sorry, getting this sinus drippage. So here we go. Here's Pier 1. You can see that this was a self-contained village, having everything from barbershops to a chapel. Give you a second just to read the top there. Here's an overview map. We'll see more of these. I'm particularly focused on the inland area in this slideshow because that's the area that hosted the hills and the steep grades and loop tracks and so forth. The other area is called the tidal area, and that's still in operation. This is a identification of the ammunition storage groups in Bunker City, as it was known. We'll see more pictures of that. Now, just to give you an idea, let me give you some background. It was a real challenge to get into the Concord Naval Station. It took me literally years of writing letters, dealing with bureaucracies, the military, the city of Concord, and so forth. And you could see that it's been a very highly restricted area for obvious reasons. I mean, they had everything from missiles to nuclear type items purportedly in the base. Consent to be searched. Threat of prosecution if you trespass. And other warnings from the Department of Defense. And yet a welcome sign. Note the layers of track, which you'll see throughout the presentation. This is where you come into the place off Port Chicago Road. This was the main interchange point with the various railroads, the Sacramento Northern, the Southern Pacific, and the Santa Fe. This sketch was done by Robert Campbell, who I believe is now deceased, but it's a pretty good slide. You can see how complex the interchange work was to get cars into and out of the base. A friend of mine, Tom Ferens, snapped this picture of a Baldwin on the Navy Railroad, the flyover over the Santa Fe and the SP. And those three classic Navy boxcars in tow. This was Pam Ramirez. She was the one that took me on the tour through the base. And she was very helpful. Part of that's cut off, but we're looking south. And on the left, you can see the engine repair facility, steam cleaning shed, the public works building, and motor vehicle repair, and storage for flammable materials. And the traffic jam up on Highway 4, which has not changed. It's the engine house, the service track, Quonset hut. Just another view of the same thing. The warehouse. Here's a siding being spotted with 3 boxcars. There's another overview from Google Maps of Bunker City and the hills. Now note the lower right corner the tracks swirling and curving like a snake. We lived across from the Concord Pavilion, and we'd walk to a ranch land back there off Blue Rock Circle, and you could see the tower for the Concord Naval Station there, the watchtower. This is where they dispatch trains. And there was a place where crews could report there. I call this a spur tree symmetry for obvious reasons. This is part of the yard. I thought it had interesting photo possibilities here. This is a revetment, again with layers of track above. Now these were built such that if there was an explosion, obviously the forces would go up, not out, to minimize damage. Note the little switch stand there. Here you have cars spotted within the revetment. And those cars had special features to protect against any kind of sparks that might be had, triggering an explosion. Huddled safely in the earth, I have here. Box cars in the revetments like sentries. Close-up of one of the switch stands. They had cattle guards. And as you'll see, they also had elk roaming around.
Bruce, are you going to talk about kind of the flow of cars into the revetments and how long they were stored there and that, or?
Well, they yes and no, I guess. The ammunition would come in and go out via this railroad to be loaded on the ships on the piers. But I think the main thrust of this presentation is to give you a sense of the geography and topography of the railroad, which is what's attracted me to it. So I guess the answer is sort of, but not really. Sorry. Okay, anyhow, Thule elk. Here you'll note a close-up on this map of the tracks that interested me that swirled about the hills. This steep grade off Bailey Road fascinated me, and can still be seen today, I believe. I'm kind of a track guy. I like complex track. In fact, I did a presentation for the Steel SIG out east on special track work, both prototypic and HO scale. Quite a unique place, as you can see, with the mountain landscape in the background. Now note the 4 levels of track here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I've never seen anything like that. I've been to a lot of railroad scenes in my day. Here's Bunker City with tracks looping around. Another view of the bunkers. Note the rails in the concrete in the foreground. S-curves sweeping around.
Question for you, Bruce.
Sure.
In this facility, was it where people were forklifts running around getting stuff off the cars into those bunkers, or were people just Armstronging stuff around on carts and such? You don't, just curious.
Well, I don't know the details of that. I was more interested in the overall layout as opposed to the process.
I got a little involved with the process for this,
Good.
partly because I worked for PFE in 1973 when the Navy blew up Roseville, and the cars that were destined for Port Chicago facility. But I took a look at it, and I actually built a model of one of the replacement cars for the 1944 explosion. But what it was is munitions would be shipped from all over the United States to this depot in Concord, and there they'd have to be stored and sorted around and kept until the ships were ready to take them on board to take the munitions to wherever in the Pacific they were going. So this was essentially a huge holding yard for explosives, and they kept the explosives inside the cars as long as possible to avoid handling. So they would store them inside the cars, and they'd keep these cars on the site. Most of the cars were not used in interchange. They actually would bring in other box cars, sometimes Navy cars, sometimes just regular commercial box cars, and then transload them to the set of cars that they kept for storage here in this large inland yard and in the bunkers and so forth. There's a lot of history goes on here back in the 1970s of protests against the Vietnam War, where there were protesters blocking this, and also a lot of concern because nuclear weapons that were stored there as well before transshipment. Anyway, the idea was that you'd bring in on regular freight car loads into Concord and then transship to these storage box cars, which would then be kept in this large yard or in the bunkers if needed. And then when the ships were ready to take them, then they would be moved from this yard to the piers out into the Carquinez Strait, where they would be transloaded to the ship.
Two modes here, right? There's the carload mode, where if there's a carload of armaments for a ship, it would be loaded as a car and stored as a car until it was moved to the ship. Then it seems like a lot of munitions were probably stored in less than carload in the bunkers and were then loaded into a car for the ship based on when they were needed.
Right.
Sounds like that's probably very interesting to look at how they move stuff around. Probably a very interesting operating schema within the facility.
One of the things that happened after the 1944 explosion, the Navy went all over the US looking for wood boxcars. And it wound up with quite a few from the Rio Grande. These were standard gauge 36-foot length cars that were obviously now surplus, even though it was during the wartime. And the Navy wanted wood cars because it would cut down on the possibility of sparks
Sure.
from steel cars. If you knock steel against steel, you can get a spark. But if they used a wood car, that was much less likely to blow up.
I wish I had known you, Ken, when I started the project. That's very interesting. It was
Yeah,
very difficult finding people that had knowledge of this facility and operation. Very difficult.
Yeah. Here, I put something on the chat, a reference to my personal blog site where back in 2018, I built a model of one of the cars. Interesting enough, there are 2 cars from this that were used at the Port Chicago facility, sitting up in the Western Railroad Museum up in Rio Vista.
Hmm.
And they were donated by the Navy after they were declared surplus.
Interesting.
And I've got there in that Blogspot article, there's actually a couple pictures of those. I was able to get into their storage sheds up in Rio Vista and get some of the full data on the cars, including the fact that they still had the brake cylinders, the brake reservoir cylinders, lettered still were in the gray paint of the Navy and lettered for the last Navy inspection.
Oh, yeah. Do you think in a future meeting you could bring the model you built?
Hmm?
In a future meeting, could you bring the model? Did I understand you to say you built a model?
Okay. Yeah, you can look at it actually right now. As I say in the chat, I put a
Oh, okay.
a URL to where my blog site.
Okay, thank you. I believe this is where they handled the missile parts, and the track went into the facility there. You can see this from Kirker Pass. There's a pull off there that you can pull off and get a good view of this. Here's a lone tank car up in the hills. Probably a fire car. Now here's some of the locomotive stock. I believe those are Jeep 10s. Army has charge of the base now by this time.
Are these in Rio Vista?
Are they in Rio Vista? Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
These are down by the tidal area.
What year was this picture of these locomotives taken, Bruce?
I was there in 07.
Thank you.
It's hard to remember back. I had to do a lot of research to just remember when I was there, but a lot of time has passed. Now, we interviewed, Steve Lane and I, Will Comer, who you'll see at the end of this. He started out as a trackman and a brakeman, conductor, engineer, ended up being a supervisor. And he lived in Concord. We tracked him down for many of his stories. He started out in the 40s at Mare Island and then was transferred to Concord Naval. And he had some great stories to tell. And he always liked, he'd rave about the Baldwins and how they were superior to the Alcos or the EMDs. Nice Nathan P3 chime whistle. And a K3. Nathan. Kind of a whistle buff too. The old and the new. These manuals were interesting. Can't read the top there. Before any car containing explosives or other dangerous material is moved, the car doors must be closed. Well, that's pretty obvious. Engines must not remain in front of buildings containing explosive or dangerous materials longer than necessary to spot cars. Rule 133, 134, evacuation. So this was dangerous stuff. And I'm sure most of you heard about the explosion. And I think it was 44 when over 300, primarily African Americans, were killed. Then there was a labor sit down over that. There's an evacuation plan. All personnel familiarize themselves with the evacuation plan for railroad cars and be ready to carry out the plan when a report of fire or disaster is received.
Particularly after the 1973 Roseville explosion.
Yeah,
They were conscious of this stuff.
I remember that, hearing about that. Here's the mention of the Sacramento Northern. Item C. Now, this was my favorite piece of rolling stock. I'd never seen anything like a laundry car before. This would make a nice model. With that robin's egg blue color. And that was in service, of course, for the Navy there. We called it a laundrette. This was in later years. I was able to snap that shot of those silver box cars. This was their fire car. That'd make a nice scratch build. And their older water car. Here are the bunkers today, kind of forlorn, with so much history behind them. So they're going to develop the real estate there now, as you probably know. We wanted to see some of the track and bunkers preserved and lobbied for that, but good luck on that. I think they are going to preserve something down the road.
For built-in bomb shelters for the homes they build.
Exactly. And this is a view from Kirker. Now that's Will Comer. He's the guy, he was in his 90s. He's since passed away, but Stephen, thanks to Stephen, who made contacts, Steve Lane, recorded him on what he remembered about working there. He was, as I mentioned, a supervisor. And he's quite a character, and he tell us about the times during, I think it was the Vietnam era, when there were so many cars, there were like 100 cars, just bottlenecking the entire facility. It was so hard to get around. So he had a lot of good stories in the past. He's from Missouri originally. Now, I was in desperate search to find pictures of the locomotives operating in the hills. They'd operate with, their limit was 3 cars, as I understand it. And they occasionally might double. They had some locomotives getting up into those steep grades, which could reach 3 or 4%. Steve and I went through the files there and obtained some good track maps of the place, indicating the radius of curves and grade percentages. But what I was leading to is it was just, excuse me, almost impossible to find photo documentation of trains operating in the hills. Now, I contacted his son, and Will Comer's son, that is. That's who you're looking at here is Will Comer. And to inquire whether in his Will's estate he had any photographs of the railroad. And the son was going to look, but I did not hear back from him, unfortunately, because I'd love to find a picture of a train operating in those hills. This was our GO team. That's Al Malik on the left, Pam. Al's a rail fan, where he's in this meeting now, perhaps. And we go to his house every Friday for an ops session. And he's very serious and formal about those operations, let me tell you. In the middle is Pam Leprechia. She was and still is a city, well, maybe she's not still there anymore, but she was with the city of Concord, and she was a key person with whom we coordinated. On the far right, that of course is Steve Lane. He's a director of the Clayton Museum and an expert on the Bay Point and Clayton Railroad, which had the first route into the naval station. Let me grab some water here. And the Navy took over from the Bay Point and Clayton Railroad. And hopefully someday Steve will have time. He's a busy guy to do a presentation on the Bay Point and Clayton. That track is still visible off Bailey Road in California, signature California poppies, of course. I wrote an article, that's the magazine I read from, in the fourth quarter of 2019, Trains and Railroads of the Past, otherwise known as TRP magazine, on the railroad. Neither of those photos on the cover are of that railroad, but you can see there the article is mentioned on the cover. If you're interested in the military and or railroad history of the facility, this is a superb book written by Minister John Keivel, who was kind enough to afford us lots of information and photos, etc., of the Concord Naval Weapons Station. They used to carry this at Berkshire Books in Concord. I think it's out of print, but maybe you could find one on the internet. It's a fascinating book. That's it.
A question, if I may, Bruce?
Mm-hmm.
In the facility, the people that ran the trains and such, were they railroad union men and women, or was it a separate force of workers that the Navy employed directly?
Ken might have a comment on this, but it was my understanding that they were civil service employees.
Civil service.
At Vandenberg in the 70s, they were a mix of some military officers that were trained, you know, like second lieutenants and lieutenants, and some civilians. Bruce, was your first slide, the opening slide had, I think, a Plymouth on it. Was that of the station?
Is that the slide of the picture of the train on the pier?
It's a train. I didn't quite make out where it was. I think it may have been was it an evening or a dark slide?
Let me see if I can find that.
May well have been a pier.
That one? Is that
You're
what
not,
you're referring to?
well, you're not shared, but
Oh, I'm not.
it looked like a Plymouth.
Let's see. So I got
You'll have to share again, Bruce. When I started the question, I went, the share was just a black screen. So you have to share again.
Okay. Share. Okay.
And sure alike.
Yes, that's the one. It's
Bigger.
hard to make out. It's pretty small, but so that is on the pier.
Oh. Yeah, tried to make it bigger, but yes.
Go back to the slide and start the slideshow on that slide. Yeah. Go back to this, click on the slide that you've got there.
There it is. And do I click on this?
That one right
slideshow
there. Yep,
icon?
click that icon right there. There you go. That's as,
Does that help you?
Yeah, it does. I'm still guessing whether it's Plymouth or Whitcomb, but yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that's okay. I see it's a pier. Looks like a Liberty ship or a Victory ship out there.
Yes.
was this before or after the explosion? Or do we know?
It's not dated.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting to think about. Was that one of the ones that blew up?
Yeah, or it could have been.
That shot is before the explosion.
Yeah. So there were probably two ships that on a pier like this that went up together.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a controversial place, as I mentioned, and I think Ken, someone alluded to it earlier, where someone sat on the tracks protesting the Vietnam War, and he had the same name as one of the Beach Boys, Brian, whatever, and he lost his leg doing that. You know, you can't stop a locomotive like you can in a car. It's unfortunate.
I want to mention a little bit of family history that I'm reminded of seeing this picture. If you look between the boxcar and the large building, you can see some guns on the apparently the stern of that ship. My wife's father, Raymond Huntsman, was a fellow who was a merchant marine and was in charge of the gun crew for one of those guns. And he was in the water twice in the Pacific. The ship sunk from under him.
Gee.
He was a changed man when he came back from the war. But I thought of those guns and I thought of Raymond Huntsman. Just a bit of family history that comes to mind.
Mm.
Anti-aircraft guns on those ships.
So Phil, is this presentation going to be available to members at the website? The recording?
I'll go ahead and take this and break it out as a separate little piece and put it up on the YouTube channel. So it'll be on YouTube. It's not really on the website. It's on YouTube.
I see.
But what I'll do is I'll break it out as a separate piece. So it'll, generally what I do, and quite frankly, I'm not very good at getting this done quickly, is generally we'll put the meeting up as a meeting, but then take this and that you've done, Bruce, and break it out as a separate piece.
I was just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. No worries.
Bruce, thank you for all the legwork and politicking you did to get the pictures and the materials and the knowledge you gained at this facility.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely super. Absolutely super.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Very, very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of kind of the formal part of the agenda for this week. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording now and just let it be open for anyone to have any conversations. So everyone have a great week. Mark your calendars for the 22nd, and we'll see you in 2 weeks on Saturday before the auction on the 22nd. So cool.